Roy Brennan counted the 3 metal credits in his palm for the 5th time that hour, hoping somehow they would multiply into something more useful. They didn't. His stomach growled loud enough that the passing maintenance drone beeped at him in what sounded like mechanical sympathy. The job board at Outpost Station 7 had been empty for 3 days straight. Every repair shop, every cargo hauler, every desperate operation that needed a mechanic had already turned him away. Too many workers, not enough work. The galaxy ran on efficiency now, and efficiency meant people like Roy slipped through the cracks. He pushed through the doors of the rusty Comet, letting the smell of burnt oil and cheaper alcohol wash over him. At least it was warm inside. The cantina buzzed with the usual crowd of smugglers, traders, and people who had given up on asking questions. Holographic advertisements flickered on every available surface, promising opportunities that never quite materialized. Roy squeezed between tables occupied by species he could barely name. A group of Tillich merchants argued over shipping routes in their clicking language. 2 Vorgan laborers arm-wrestled while their friends placed bets. Nobody looked at him twice. That was fine. Being invisible had its advantages. The back corner had an empty booth, half hidden behind a broken ventilation shaft that dripped condensation onto the floor. Roy slid onto the cracked synthetic leather and immediately regretted it. The seat was damp. Everything on the station was damp, rusty, or both. He was about to signal for the cheapest thing on the menu when a voice spoke from the shadows across the booth. "This seat is taken." Roy jumped. He hadn't seen anyone sitting there. The figure wore a heavy brown cloak with the hood pulled low, and from what he could see, they were small. Probably humanoid, but that didn't narrow it down much. "Sorry, I didn't see you," Roy said, starting to stand. "I'll just wait." The voice was female, young, and carried an accent he couldn't place. "Actually, stay. Sit down. Please." Roy hesitated. Something in her tone made alarm bells ring in his head. That was the voice of someone in trouble, trying very hard not to sound like it. Before he could decide, 3 massive shapes appeared at their table. Roy's eyes traveled up, and further up until he was looking at faces that belonged in nightmare fuel catalogs. Dravik enforcers. Each one stood over 7 feet tall with gray scaled skin, too many teeth, and muscles that suggested they could bend steel for fun. Well, the lead Dravik rumbled. His breath smelled like rotting meat. "Looks like your friend finally showed up." "I don't know what you're talking about," the cloaked figure said quietly. "Don't play stupid with Grendok." The Dravik leaned down, placing both massive hands on their table. The whole thing creaked under the weight. "Your partner borrowed money from the wrong people. Now it's time to pay." Roy's survival instinct screamed at him to run. Instead, his mouth opened and words came out before his brain could stop them. "I think you've got the wrong booth, friend." 3 sets of cold, reptilian eyes fixed on him. Grendok's lipless mouth curved into something that might have been a smile on a creature that understood the concept. "And who are you supposed to be?" "The muscle." Grendok laughed, a sound like grinding gravel. "Humans. Always thinking they're tougher than they look." The cloaked figure shifted, and her hood slipped back just enough for Roy to catch a glimpse of her face. His breath caught. Scales, but not the rough gray of the Dravik. These were delicate, iridescent, catching the dim light and throwing back colors that shouldn't exist. Blue, green, gold, silver, all at once and none at once. Draconi. Roy had seen exactly 2 Draconi in his entire life, both on news broadcasts about imperial politics happening in parts of the galaxy he would never visit. They were the rulers, the elite, the species that sat at the top of every galactic chart that mattered. What was one doing hiding in a dump like this? "Last chance," Grendok said. "Pay what's owed, or we take it out in trade. And trust me, we'll get creative." The other 2 Dravik moved to block the exit route. Several nearby patrons suddenly discovered urgent business elsewhere. The bartender, a grizzled Tillich with one eye, very deliberately looked away as Roy's hand moved to the cheap multi-tool on his belt. It wouldn't do anything against these monsters except make them angry, but his hands needed something to do. His heart hammered so hard he could hear it in his ears. The Draconi girl met his eyes. Hers were the color of liquid amber, and they held a question. Or maybe a plea. Roy didn't speak whatever silent language this was, but he understood the basics. She was asking if he would help. Every rational thought his head said no. Said run. Said this wasn't his problem, and getting between a draconi and trouble was a great way to end up dead or worse. Roy grabbed his glass of water and threw it in Grindok's face. For one beautiful moment, the entire cantina froze. Grindok stood there, water dripping from his scales, his expression caught somewhere between shock and rage. Then Roy kicked the table with everything he had. It flipped up and slammed into Grindok's chest. Roy grabbed the girl's arm and yanked her out of the booth. Run! They ran. Blaster fire erupted behind them, scorching the walls and making the other patrons scream and dive for cover. Roy pulled the girl through a service entrance he had mapped weeks ago during a brief job cleaning waste reclamation systems. It was amazing what you learned when you were desperate enough to take any work. The corridors here were narrow, designed for maintenance drones, not people. They had to run hunched over while alarms began wailing throughout the station. Roy's lungs burned and his legs screamed, but he didn't slow down. They burst out into the lower docking bay, a cavernous space filled with ships of every size and quality. Most were locked down tight. Roy's eyes found his shuttle in Bay 12. The patchwork looked like it had been assembled from 6 different ships by a committee that couldn't agree on anything. Because it had been. That's your ship, the girl gasped. You got a better option? She didn't answer. Behind them, heavy footsteps echoed through the corridor. Grindok's voice roared something about ripping them apart slowly. Roy made a decision he knew he would regret. Come on. They ran for the patchwork as the station's security finally decided to care about blaster fire in public areas. The patchwork lived up to its name in the worst possible way. Roy had bought it for almost nothing from a Tillich trader who looked relieved to be rid of it. Now, sprinting up the boarding ramp with a Draconi princess and 3 murderous enforcers chasing them, Roy understood why. Buckle in, he shouted, throwing himself into the pilot's seat. His fingers flew across controls that responded with concerning delays. The engine coughed to life like an old man waking from a nap. The girl grabbed onto whatever she could find as the ship lurched forward. This thing flies. Define flies. The patchwork scraped against the docking bay ceiling, throwing sparks before Roy got the altitude under control. Through the viewport, he saw Grindok and his crew reaching the bay just as the station's magnetic doors began closing for lockdown. They were going to make it. Roy punched the throttle. They shot out of the station so fast that the artificial gravity couldn't keep up. Everything not bolted down flew backward. The girl made a sound that was definitely not dignified as she slammed into the back wall. Saw the... Roy wrestled with the controls, fighting against a ship that seemed determined to go in every direction except forward. Warning lights painted his face red. The engine temperature gauge had 3 settings: cold, normal, and melting. Right now, it was firmly in the melting category. Are we going to die? The girl asked, pulling herself into the co-pilot's seat. Not immediately. Roy checked the scanner. 3 blips appear behind them. Station security ships. Small, fast, and definitely interested in their unauthorized departure. Though I'm open to revising that estimate. She stared at the approaching ships, then at Roy, then at the control panel held together with what appeared to be fusion tape and prayer. You saved me from those enforcers to kill us both in this flying death trap. Hey, the patchwork has feelings. Roy patted the console. It sparked. Okay, bad example. The security ships were gaining fast. Roy's scanner showed their weapons charging. This was the part where a smart person would surrender and explain the situation to reasonable authorities. Roy had met station security before. Reasonable wasn't in their job description that he dove toward a nearby asteroid field. What are you doing? The girl's voice climbed an octave. Something stupid. The asteroids loomed ahead like a wall of waiting death. The security ships were already pulling back, unwilling to follow. Nobody flew through asteroid fields except in emergencies or insanity. Roy qualified for both. The patchwork shuddered as they entered the field. Roy's hands moved on instinct, dodging chunks of rock that ranged from car-sized to moon-sized. The ship's patched-together hull groaned with each near miss. Something in the back made a sound like metal screaming. "We're going to hit that." The girl pointed at a particularly large asteroid directly in their path. "Yep." Roy waited until the last possible second before firing the maneuvering thrusters. The ship spun sideways, scraping past the asteroid with inches to spare. The girl made several sounds that probably translated to very improper things in her language. When they finally emerged from the field, the security ships were gone. Roy let out a breath he didn't know he had been holding and checked their systems. Fuel at 30%. Life support at 70 and dropping. Hull integrity questionable. They were alive, which put them ahead of his usual success rate. The girl sat very still, her scales shifting through colors Roy had never seen before. Her hood had fallen back completely now, revealing a face that was definitely draconian. Young, maybe his age, with those impossible scales and eyes that held too much intelligence. "So," Roy said, trying to sound casual while his hands shook, "want to tell me why Dravik enforcers are after you?" She was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was different. Less scared, more tired. "My name is Lyra. I'm the daughter of Emperor Draxus." Roy's brain stuttered. The Emperor Draxus. The ruler of the Draconian Empire. That Emperor Draxus. "Yes. And you were hiding in the Rusty Comet because I ran away." Lyra looked out at the stars. "There's a bounty on me. Not officially, but everyone knows. Return the princess, get enough credits to buy a small moon. Those enforcers figured they could grab me before anyone else did." Roy processed this information. He had accidentally rescued the most wanted person in the galaxy. If he turned her in, he could live comfortably for the rest of his life. If he kept helping her, he would probably end up dead. The math was simple. "Where are you trying to go?" he asked. Lyra looked surprised. "You're not going to take me back. Are you going to pay me enough to fix my ship? I don't have any credits. I left with nothing." "Then I guess we're both broke and running." Roy checked their heading. "The nearest safe port is Helios Hub. 3 days away. We got enough fuel if we're lucky and the ship doesn't fall apart." "Why are you helping me?" Roy thought about it. About the look in her eyes when Grindock had threatened her. About how many times he had needed help and gotten none. About how the galaxy loved stepping on people who were already down. "Because someone should," he said finally. Lyra studied him with an expression he couldn't read. Then she did something unexpected. She smiled. Not a princess smile, practiced and perfect. A real one, uncertain and genuine. "Thank you, Roy Brennan." "How did you know my name?" "Your jacket. It has a name patch." Roy looked down. Sure enough, his old work jacket still had the embroidered name from his last real job. He had forgotten it was there, right? "Well, Princess Lyra, welcome to the worst shuttle in the galaxy. Food's in the storage locker, bathrooms behind that panel, and if you hear anything that sounds like exploding, let me know immediately." "What does exploding sound like?" "You'll know." The ship's scanner beeped. Roy's stomach dropped. A new contact had appeared on their sensors. Bigger than the security ships. Much bigger. The signature matched Imperial design. Someone very important was looking for the missing princess. Roy killed the Patchwork's engines and let them drift. It was an old smuggler trick he had learned for Telecargo Runner. Most scanners looked for engine signatures and active power sources. A cold ship floating among asteroids looked like debris. "Will that work?" Lyra whispered, as if sound could travel through vacuum. "Depends on how good their sensors are." Roy watched the Imperial ship's icon move across his screen. It was doing a grid search pattern, methodical and patient. "And how lucky we are." They sat in silence, watching. The ship passed within scanning range once, twice. Roy held his breath. Then it moved on, heading deeper into the asteroid field. "They're gone," Lyra said. "For now." Roy brought the systems back online slowly. The engine coughed and sputtered before finding its rhythm. "But they'll be back. Someone really wants you home." "My father." Lyra's scales shifted to darker blues. "He needs me for a political marriage. To Prince Vortham of the Scorus Federation." Roy had heard of the Scorus. Everyone had. They were expanding their territory with the kind of aggression that made other species nervous. "Let me guess. You're not a fan of the prince?" "I've met him twice. Both times he spent the entire meeting talking about inferior species and proper hierarchy. Lyra's voice went flat. He believes humans should be classified as semi-sentient labor, along with about 40 other species. Charming guy. The marriage secures a military alliance. My father gets access to the Scores fleet. They get legitimacy through connection to the imperial family. She looked at her hands. I'm just the contract that seals the deal. Roy had grown up in the outer colonies where political marriages were the stuff of historical dramas, not real life. The idea of being sold off like cargo made his skin crawl. That's barbaric. That's politics. Lyra's amber eyes met his. In my world, individual wants don't matter. The empire matters. Stability matters. One person's happiness is a small price for peace. Except you're not just one person. You're the person being sacrificed. Exactly. She smiled sadly. Nobody asked me if I wanted this. They just told me it was my duty, my honor, my purpose. Roy checked their fuel levels and did some quick math in his head. They could make Helios Hub if nothing went wrong, which meant they definitely wouldn't make it because things always went wrong. So what's your plan? Run forever. I didn't have a plan. I just knew I couldn't go through with the marriage. Lyra pulled her knees up to her chest, looking smaller and younger than before. I thought if I disappeared, maybe they would find another solution. Form the alliance some other way. Or start a war looking for you. Or that. The ship drifted in silence for a while. Roy pulled out a ration bar from his emergency supplies and split it with Lyra. She took a bite and made a face. This tastes like recycled cardboard. That's because it probably is. Roy chewed his own piece. Welcome to How the Other Half Lives, princess. Don't call me that. Her tone was sharp. I'm not a princess right now. I'm just Lyra. Okay, just Lyra. Roy finished his ration bar, which did nothing for his hunger. Can I ask you something? You just saved my life. I think you've earned questions. Why were you in that cantina? If you're running away, why stop at the worst station in this sector? Lyra's scales flushed with colors that probably meant embarrassment. I was trying to blend in. I thought if I went somewhere low profile, nobody would look for me there. How's that working out? I'm starting to think my understanding of low profile needs work. She looked around the patchwork's cramped interior. I've never been on a ship this small. Or this improvised. The technical term is jerry-rigged. Roy patted the console. But she gets us where we need to go. Usually, your confidence is inspiring. I save the confidence for times when we're not being hunted by an imperial fleet. Lyra laughed. It was a startled sound, like she had surprised herself. You're strange for a human. Most people I've met are either terrified of Draconi or trying to impress us. I'm too tired to be terrified and too broke to bother impressing anyone. Roy adjusted their course slightly. Besides, you're just another person in trouble. The scales are pretty, but they don't change that. Her expression shifted to something Roy couldn't quite read. Pretty, don't let it go to your head. You still threw up on my ship during the asteroid field. I did not throw up. I had a moment of extreme nausea that I controlled with dignity. Sure, we'll go with that version. They talked while the ship limped toward Helios Hub. Lyra asked questions about human culture, about growing up in the colonies, about what it was like to fix machines for a living. Roy found himself talking more than he had in months. About his family's repair shop that got bought out by a corporate chain. About drifting from station to station trying to find work. About the loneliness of being just another nobody in a galaxy full of them. In turn, Lyra told him about palace life. About tutors and etiquette and learning 50 languages she would never use. About watching her mother die slowly from some mysterious illness that the doctors could never quite name. About being surrounded by hundreds of people and still feeling completely alone. We're not that different, Roy said. You're trapped by too much importance. I'm trapped by too little. Both of us stuck in places we didn't choose. When did you become a philosopher? Probably around the time I threw water at a 7-foot enforcer and decided to become a wanted man. Lyra's laugh was interrupted by alarms screaming through the ship. Roy's eyes shot to the scanner. The Imperial ship was back, and this time it had friends. 3 ships, moving in formation, boxing them in. They found us, Lyra breathed. Roy's hands flew over the controls. The patchwork responded sluggishly. They were low on fuel, low on options, and completely outmatched. The scanner showed the lead ship powering weapons. "Hold on," Roy said. "This is going to get rough. Rougher than the asteroid field. Much rougher." The first shot hit their port thruster. The patchwork spun like a leaf in a tornado. Roy fought the controls while Lyra hung on her seat and probably regretted every choice that led to this moment. Sparks erupted from the damaged thruster, and the whole ship screamed in protest. "We're losing altitude," Lyra shouted over the alarms. "We're in space. There's no altitude to lose." Roy yanked the stabilizers, trying to stop the spin. The ship responded, but barely. They were bleeding fuel from the damaged thruster, and the life support was dropping fast. Another shot lanced past them, close enough that Roy felt the heat through the hull. The Imperial ships weren't trying to destroy them, just disable them, which meant capture, which meant Lyra going back to her arranged marriage, and Roy probably being executed for kidnapping a princess. "There!" Lyra pointed at something on the scanner. "That moon. Can we reach it?" Roy looked. A small moon orbited a gas giant ahead of them. According to the outdated star charts, it used to be a mining colony. Abandoned now. But abandonment facilities, maybe breathable atmosphere, and most importantly, a place to crash land instead of just crash. "Hold tight." He aimed the patchwork at the moon and fired every remaining thruster. The ship groaned and shuddered, but she moved. Behind them, the Imperial ships adjusted course to follow. The moon's gravity caught them hard. Roy had seconds to decide between a controlled crash and an uncontrolled one. He chose controlled, which was optimistic considering half their systems were dead. They hit the surface in what used to be a landing bay. The patchwork skidded across rusted metal, throwing up sparks and pieces of hull plating. They slammed into an old cargo container, and finally, mercifully, stopped. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Lyra's voice, shaky but alive, broke the silence. "Did we survive?" "I think so." Roy unbuckled and immediately regretted it. Everything hurt. He grabbed the emergency supply pack and a portable oxygen unit. "But we need to move. They'll land in minutes." The landing bay was a graveyard of old equipment. Corporate logos faded by time, and dust covered every surface. This had been a human mining operation once, back when the outer colonies still believed promises about profit sharing and retirement plans. Roy and Lyra stumbled through corridors lit only by emergency lighting that somehow still functioned. The air was thin but breathable. Someone had left the atmospheric processors running. "Why would anyone abandon this place?" Lyra asked, her breath visible in the cold air. Mining corporations do the math. When profit drops below cost, they pack up and leave. Workers included. Roy had seen it happen twice in his lifetime. Entire colonies just left to rot because the numbers didn't work anymore. They turned a corner and froze. Light spilled from an open doorway ahead. Real light, not emergency lighting. And voices. "Someone's here," Lyra whispered. Roy approached carefully, hand on his multi-tool for whatever good it would do. He peered through the doorway and stopped, confused by what he saw at a makeshift community. People had converted the old mess hall into living quarters. Hydroponic gardens grew under salvaged lamps. Children played with toys made from mining equipment parts. An elderly human woman stirred something in a large pot that smelled surprisingly good. "Well," the woman said without looking up, "don't just stand there. Either come in or leave, but quit blocking the doorway." Roy and Lyra exchanged glances, then entered. About 15 humans, 3 Tillictrators, and a Vorgan family stopped what they were doing to stare at them. Specifically, to stare at Lyra's very obvious draconi features. The elderly woman finally looked up. Her eyes were sharp despite her age, and her weathered hands never stopped stirring. "I'm Ruth. You're either very lost or very desperate." "Which is it?" "Both," Roy admitted. "Our ship crashed. We're being chased." "By Imperial forces," a young woman added, pointing at a jury-rigged scanner in the corner. 3 ships in orbit. They'll land soon." "We don't want trouble," Lyra said quickly. "We'll leave as soon as we can repair our ship." Ruth laughed, a dry sound like whined through empty corridors. "Leave? Child, that ship of yours isn't going anywhere for days, if ever." And those Imperial ships aren't leaving until they find what they're looking for. Her eyes fixed on Lyra, which I'm guessing is you. The room went silent. One of the Vorgan males shifted his considerable bulk between the children and Lyra. The Tillich traders clicked to each other in their language. We were abandoned here 15 years ago, Ruth continued, still stirring. The Draconi Empire bought out our mining rights, then decided we weren't worth evacuating. Too expensive, not profitable. So we survived, built our own life. She pointed her spoon at Lyra. Now you show up, bringing Imperial attention to our doorstep. Give me one reason why we shouldn't hand you over. Roy stepped forward. Because she's running from the same system that abandoned you. Is she now? Ruth's expression didn't change. And what's a Draconi princess running from? Too many jewels? Too much power? A forced marriage, Lyra said quietly. To a man who thinks you're all semi-sentient labor. Who wants to use my family's alliance to expand his empire and classify dozens of species as property. That got their attention. The young woman at the scanner, who Roy noticed had mechanics grease under her fingernails, spoke up. Vortham. You're talking about Prince Vortham. You know him. Know of him. The scores burned through 3 mining colonies last year, enslaved the populations. Called it voluntary labor reassignment. Her voice was bitter. We heard the stories through trader networks. Ruth stopped stirring. She studied Lyra with new intensity. So you ran away? Yes. Leaving your father to deal with the fallout? Yes. That took guts. Ruth's expression softened slightly. Stupid but gutsy. She looked around at her community. What do you all think? The discussion was brief and conducted in multiple languages. But the conclusion was unanimous. The young woman approached Roy and Lyra, extending a grease-stained hand. I'm Dani. Used to be a shuttle mechanic before this place went dark. If you're staying, you work. No frelo others. We'll work, Roy said, shaking her hand. Good, because those Imperial ships are landing now, and we've got about 10 minutes to hide you before they start searching. Outside, the sound of ships descending rumbled through the colony. Roy looked at Lyra. She looked back, scales shifting through colors that might have been fear or determination or both. Welcome to Rust Haven, Ruth said. Try not to get us all killed. Danny shoved Roy and Lyra into a maintenance shaft that smelled like rust and broken dreams. Stay quiet. Don't move. If they scan for life signs, hold your breath and pray their equipment is as old as everything else in this sector. The metal grate closed above them, leaving them in darkness barely broken by thin strips of emergency lighting. Through the grate, Roy watched Danny scatter tools across the floor to make it look like she had been working alone. Heavy footsteps echoed through the colony. Imperial soldiers moved with precision, searching every room. Roy counted at least 6, all heavily armed. Then another figure entered, and Roy's breath caught. The newcomer was Draconi, but different from Lyra. Older, with scales that had darkened to deep emerald. He wore military honors across his chest and carried himself with the weight of someone who had spent decades giving orders that people followed. Commander Theros, Danny said, her voice carefully neutral. Welcome to Rust Haven. You looking for something specific, or is this a social call? Theros ignored her, his sharp eyes scanning every detail. This colony was listed as abandoned. Listing's wrong. We're still here. Have been for 15 years. Without Imperial authorization, we asked for evacuation. Your Empire said no. So we may do. Danny crossed her arms. What do you want, Commander? Theros pulled up a holographic display from his wrist unit. Lyra's face appeared, rotating slowly. This female was tracked to this moon. Her ship crashed in your landing bay. Where is she? Haven't seen anyone matching that description. Then you won't mind if we search. Actually, I mind quite a bit. This is our home. You can't just storm in here because your scanners think they saw something. Theros stepped closer to Danny. He towered over her, a mountain of scales and authority. I can do whatever is necessary to complete my mission. The princess must be returned. Princess? Danny's surprise seemed genuine. That's the Emperor's daughter? Yes. And harboring her is treason. From their hiding spot, Roy felt Lyra tense beside him. He reached out slowly, finding her hand in the darkness. She gripped it tight enough to hurt. Ruth's voice cut through the tension. Commander, I'm the leader of this community, such as it is. She walked into view, leaning on a cane made from old piping. You say she's a princess running from her duties. We say we're workers abandoned by our employers. Seems like the Empire has a pattern of not caring about individuals. Theros turned to her, and something in his expression shifted. Not much, but enough. I have my orders. I'm sure you do. Just like you had orders when you left us here to die. Ruth's voice was steel wrapped in rust. How many colonies like ours exist, Commander? How many people did your empire decide weren't worth the cost of basic decency? That wasn't a military decision, but you enforced it. You and soldiers like you. Ruth moved closer, her old eyes fierce. So forgive me if I'm not jumping to help you drag a young woman back to a life she clearly doesn't want. The silence stretched. Roy could hear his own heartbeat, loud in his ears. One of Theros' soldiers shifted nervously. She's not here, Theros said finally. Her ship is destroyed. She probably died in the crash. His soldiers looked at him, confused. One started to speak, but Theros cut him off with a sharp gesture. We're leaving. Continue the search in other sectors. They filed out, boots ringing on metal floors. Roy didn't dare move until their ship's engines roared to life and faded into the distance. Danny opened the grate. You can come out now. Roy helped Lyra climb out of the shaft. Her scales were pale, almost white with shock. He let us go. Theros has known me since I was a child. He let us go. Don't celebrate yet. Ruth sat down heavily, suddenly looking every year of her age. He bought you time, not freedom. Eventually, someone else will come looking, and they won't be conflicted about their orders. Lyra moved to the entrance, staring at the sky where Theros' ship had vanished. Why did he do it? Maybe he's tired, Roy said. Tired of following orders that hurt people. Tired of being part of a system that leaves colonies to rot and forces princesses into marriages they don't want. Or maybe, Danny added, working on a portable transmitter she had pulled from storage. He's wondering when everyone else will get tired too. Roy looked at the equipment. What are you doing? Building something that might change the conversation. Danny connected wires with practiced efficiency. You said Vortham wants to classify most species as labor, that the marriage alliance would give him legitimacy. What if everyone knew that? What if this wasn't a private family matter, but public knowledge? Lyra's eyes widened. A broadcast? You want to broadcast my story, not just your story. The truth about why this marriage matters. About what it means for the rest of us who aren't at the top of the food chain. Danny looked at Ruth. We've got the old mining colony transmitter. It's powerful enough to punch through to commercial channels. Get the message out before anyone can stop it. That's insane, Roy said. The moment she goes public, every bounty hunter and Imperial soldier in the sector will know exactly where we are. They already know where we are, Ruth pointed out. Theros knows. He's just choosing to forget for now. How long do you think that lasts? Lyra was quiet, her scales shifting through colors. Finally, she spoke. If I do this, there's no going back. My father will have no choice but to respond publicly. The Scorus will consider it an insult. It could start a war. Or, Danny said, it could start a conversation. About choice. About who gets to decide how people live their lives. That's a lot of weight to put on one broadcast, Roy said. Humans have started revolutions with less, Ruth replied. Sometimes all it takes is one person saying what everyone else is thinking. Lyra looked at Roy. What do you think? He thought about Theros, a soldier who had bent his orders to let them escape. About Ruth and her community, surviving where they shouldn't have. About himself, a nobody mechanic who had accidentally become part of something bigger. I think, Roy said slowly, that hiding won't work forever. Eventually, you run out of places to run. So maybe it's time to stop running and start talking. Lyra took a deep breath, her scales settling into determined silver. Then let's talk. Let's tell everyone exactly what they're supporting when they support this alliance. Danny grinned. Now we're thinking like revolutionaries. Or criminals, Roy muttered. Sometimes, Ruth said, those are the same thing. The transmission equipment looked like it had been assembled by someone who had learned engineering from ancient instruction manuals and pure stubbornness, which, according to Danny, was exactly what happened. Lyra stood in front of the camera, scales shifting through nervous colors. Roy stood behind the camera with Danny, adjusting the focus. Ruth had gathered the entire colony to watch, their faces reflecting hope and fear in equal measure. "Ready?" Danny asked. Lyra nodded. The red light blinked on. "My name is Lyra, daughter of Emperor Draxus of the Draconi Empire. I am being forced into marriage with Prince Vortham of the Scorus Federation to secure a military alliance. I am recording this to tell you what that alliance really means." Her voice was steady now, clear. Roy watched as she transformed from the scared girl in the cantina into something else. Someone who had found her voice. Prince Vortham believes most species in this galaxy are inferior. He calls them semi-sentient labor. Under the proposed alliance, the Scorus will gain legitimacy to expand their territory and reclassify entire populations as property. My marriage is the contract that makes this legal, and I refuse to sign it. She talked about meeting the people of Rusthaven, about workers abandoned by corporations that the Empire allowed to operate without consequences, about how the same systems that forced her into this marriage created colonies of forgotten people. I was raised to believe that individual sacrifice was necessary for the greater good. But I've learned that greater good often means protecting power at the expense of everyone else. Real strength doesn't come from forcing people into roles they don't choose. It comes from giving them the freedom to choose. The broadcast went out across commercial frequencies, bouncing through relay stations, spreading through networks faster than anyone could stop it. On cargo ships and mining stations, on colony worlds and inner planets, people watched a Draconi princess challenge her own empire. Roy monitored the responses flooding in. Some called Lyra a traitor. Others called her brave. The galaxy was talking, and once started, that conversation would be hard to stop. The broadcast ended. Lyra stepped away from the camera, and for a moment, she just stood there, processing what she had done. "Well," Ruth said finally, "that's done. Now we wait." They didn't wait long. Within an hour, ships began appearing in orbit. Not just Imperial forces this time. Media vessels, independent traders, even a few military ships from neutral systems. Everyone wanted to see what happened next. Roy was helping Danny reinforce the colony's outer doors when the scanners showed a familiar signature. A single large ship, heavily decorated. Imperial command vessel. "He's here," Lyra said quietly. "My father." The ship landed with ceremony that seemed absurd in the rusty wasteland of Rusthaven. When the boarding ramp lowered, Emperor Draxus descended with a full honor guard. He was massive, even for a Draconi, his scales the deep purple of ancient royalty. He stopped at the colony entrance, looking at the patched walls and salvaged equipment, at the people who stepped forward to form a barrier between him and his daughter. His expression was unreadable. "Father," Lyra said, stepping forward. Roy moved with her, refusing to let her face this alone. "You have caused considerable trouble," Draxus said. His voice was deep enough to vibrate through the floor. "I know. Your broadcast has been viewed by half the galaxy. The Scorus are threatening war. Multiple systems are questioning treaties. There will be consequences." "I know," Lyra repeated, "but I won't go back. I won't be used to legitimize Vortham's expansion." Draxus looked at her for a long moment. Then his gaze moved to the colonists, to Ruth standing proud despite her age, to Danny with her grease-stained hands, to Roy, a nobody mechanic standing beside a princess. "Tell me," the Emperor said, "what gave you the courage to do this?" "A human threw water at an enforcer and saved my life," Lyra said simply. "Then he kept saving it, even when it would have been easier to walk away. These people gave me shelter when they had every reason not to. They reminded me that courage isn't about following predetermined paths. It's about choosing your own." Draxus turned to Roy. "You are the mechanic." "Yes, sir." Roy managed not to stammer. "You convinced my daughter to broadcast classified information and challenge Imperial policy. Actually, your daughter convinced herself. I just didn't stop her." Something that might have been amusement flickered across Draxus's face. The Scorus alliance was a mistake. I knew this, but saw no other option. Your broadcast forced my hand. He looked back at Lyra. Sometimes the most difficult path is the right one. What happens now? Lyra asked. Now we negotiate. Properly. Without using you as collateral. Draxus gestured to the colony. And these people receive reparations for their abandonment. Ruth, was it? You will have ships to evacuate anyone who wishes to leave, and resources to sustain those who wish to stay. Ruth's eyes narrowed. Just like that? After 15 years. Just like that. My daughter embarrassed me into doing what should have been done years ago. I owe you an apology and action to match. The Emperor turned to leave, then paused. Lyra, you may choose your own path now, but I hope you will choose to return and use what you've learned. The Empire needs voices like yours. Voices that question. And if I choose to stay here? Lyra asked, then I lose a daughter to gain wisdom. Though I hope you will at least visit. Draxus departed with the same ceremony he arrived with. As a ship lifted off, the tension broke. The colonists erupted in celebration, disbelief, and probably shock. Roy found Lyra standing apart from the celebration, looking at the stars. You did it, he said. We did it. She smiled at him. What happens now, Roy Brennan? Now, I fix my ship. You figure out what you want to do. Maybe we both stop running and start building something instead. That sounds like a plan. It's a terrible plan with no details. And it's perfectly in character. Lyra's scales shimmered with colors that meant happiness. Thank you for everything. Thank you for making life interesting. It was getting boring. They stood together, watching more ships arrive in orbit. The galaxy was changing slowly, one conversation at a time. And somewhere in that vast conversation, a broke mechanic and a runaway princess had accidentally started something that might actually matter. Roy, Lyra said after a while. Yeah, next time you pick a table in a cantina, make sure it's the right one. Where's the fun in that? She laughed, and the sound carried across the rust and ruins of a colony that refused to die. Above them, stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, indifferent to empires and alliances. But down here on a forgotten moon, change had taken root, and that was enough.